So I've been doing some research on Elon Musk. If you guys don't know who he is, he's a billionaire. He's one of the more well-known billionaires because of his dealings with Tesla, the electric car, which is a very well-known car for a lot of tech geeks. Not really for the general public. I mean, if you ask anyone on the street, I don't know. But anyhow, the point is he's very well known in certain circles, and it's for great reason. So I wanted to share with you 10 facts you may not know about Elon Musk. Let's begin. Number one, it took him 4 tries to successfully launch his first rocket through his company SpaceX. The interesting thing is he only had enough money for his final launch, and if he couldn't do that, then they had to pack the whole thing up. Fortunately, it did succeed. Number two, he wants to do something and he does it. It's simple as that in certain ways. He wanted to build rocket ships and learn, about how to get to space. And so he does what most people wouldn't do, which is he started reading books on rocket science and learned how. I think a lot of people dream, but he actually executes. And it's interesting because Jim Cantrell, who was an engineer that Musk code called back in 2001, he actually was he had a very interesting story about Musk. So Musk actually borrowed every single book that he could on rocket science and rocket propulsion from this guy and just read it all. And it's a very clear picture of how he is. And this guy, Cantrell, describes Elon as someone who sucks the knowledge and experience out of people he is around. I think it's an important thing to learn and take something better from people better than you. Of course, don't take it too far. You can still make it a win-win situation, and don't be that leechy, value-sucking, sleazy guy. Just you can still be someone who's win-win and gives value back. Number three, he's not as crazy as you think. So a lot of people call him, or they just think of this guy as this like crazy person who just starts companies, goes to Mars, thinks about nuking the poles of Mars to create a livable biosphere in case the Earth somehow hits another mass extinction, which there's always a 1% chance of that. However, he was actually more practical behind the scenes. Some people think he did the things he did for money, but actually, if you examine his interviews and speeches, it turns out this guy actually really thinks about higher level issues on how he can help the world. So he first set out to see what were the biggest problems that Earth had to face in the next few eras, which included energy renewal, space exploration, and a number of other things. And so his first goal was a more practical goal. He didn't think that he could go to space immediately. He just thought, how can I help out? How can I help out with this situation? And it wasn't about money. He just wanted to help out. So his first practical project was, how can I increase NASA's budget, which is what he went on to do. And over time that evolved into SpaceX. Number four, most people think that they can't start a business because they assume that you need millions of dollars to do so. That's not always the case. For some businesses like a gas station, yes, you need like $100,000 plus to pay for rent and all the supplies and the actual location. But for him, he's an example of how certain businesses have low startup costs, which some people know, and there's a lot more competition because of that. But there's still a ton of other people who are really just using every excuse in the book to prevent themselves from starting. And so he's a great example. Him and his brother, they had about $28,000, and that came from his father, plus $6,000 from his friend. And they basically stepped in his office, they showered at the YMCA, and subsisted on fast food, which I don't recommend. All the scientific research I've poured over, it's very clear that he probably would have been more healthy, more productive, and had more energy if he ate good food. Apparently he drinks like 4 cups of Diet Coke every day. Maybe he should cut that out. I'm just saying. But nonetheless, he was able to do it. Maybe he couldn't afford good food. Arguably, you technically can if you look at some YouTube videos. So maybe that's an excuse as well. The point is, I just think he could have ate better food, and nonetheless, he was able to hustle really hard with very little money, and maybe you can do the same thing. And this is not a sponsor for Planet Fitness, but I just know of them. And Planet Fitness is like this nationwide gym, and it's about $10 per month, and they have free showers as well. So you can probably get there cheaper than the YMCA. Just saying. And again, this whole concept of sleeping on the floor or on the carpet while you made your success is nothing new. In fact, there's modern celebrities who have done this, and they've slept on carpets for a long time to do this, including the Vine star Jerome Jarre or the musician Ed Sheeran. Number 5, get your hands dirty. So basically, Musk doesn't, he doesn't mind physical work. I don't think, he prefers it, but it's not beneath him. And it reminds me a lot of successful businessmen like Sam Walton, who are not scared of getting their hands a little bit dirty. So basically, when he was 17 and in Canada, he had a job where he would shovel dirt into a boiler room with a hazmat suit. And so, yeah, sometimes you're going to have to do stuff that you don't really like, or, some people wouldn't, to succeed. And that's how he succeeded in certain ways. 6, learn faster. So one thing is that this guy is willing to hustle and work harder. He actually took a programming language workbook, and it's supposed to take about 6 months to complete, but he decided to stay up for numerous nights in a row, and he finished this whole thing in a matter of 3 days, and by that time he was a certified programmer by 1984 standards at the time, which was incredible. I think back to my previous point, it's important to do things that average people won't do. Successful people, as the billionaire John Paul DeJorio says, they do the things that unsuccessful people are unwilling to do. I think there's this fallacy or myth that, you just have to look for your passion and everything will be easy and interesting and none of it will feel like work. For some people, that may be the case. For maybe even Elon Musk, there were certain things that he did where it didn't feel like work. It probably was interesting enough for him to get through that book. And for other people, like, they just can't do it because they're not interested enough in computer science. So of course, you want to work as hard as you can to move your passions and interests and align them with some level of practical skill. But at the same time, there will be stuff that is going to be tough or difficult or you won't want to do completely, but that's necessary to your success. So don't let that hold you back as an excuse because it's not in your interest or passion. That may just be your laziness. Next thing. So Elon Musk, he described his childhood as nonstop horrible. He actually was emotionally tormented, apparently by his father, and bullied in school. He chose not to disclose much about his past to his biographer. Nonetheless, he called his experience with his father misery and emotional torture. This got me thinking, and there's this very well-known book on success called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and it talks about some things which I agree with and some things I don't, and it really gets me thinking, and it really brings the good point that success is much deeper and more complicated than you think. And it points to this huge, nationwide study of the highest IQ tested children in the entire world, and they had such bright lives because they were ridiculously smart. They were like prodigies, and yet when they tracked these people until they died, many of them turned out to be garbage collectors and all this other stuff, and it was very confusing. And it turns out there were other elements that were more important than your IQ. Apparently, once you hit a certain threshold of IQ, more IQ doesn't help, and thus have spurred other books like Emotional Intelligence to cover other areas of components needed to be successful, like emotional intelligence. I argue personally that street savvy and street smarts is fairly important. Social intelligence, of course, is fairly important as well. And Outliers argues that parents who give their child the right opportunities and the right accesses to resources are really important too. I would say Elon Musk's example is one where it's one of the reasons why I partially disagree with what Outlier says, because he didn't have the best childhood, nor did Chris Gardner, nor did uh, you know, Oprah Winfrey. She was sexually abused, and she also had a baby that was not born, uh, that was miscarriage. And there's all sorts of other examples of people like John Paul DeJoria who had very little access to resources. Chris Gardner had no high school education, and yet they went on to succeed many times over. So those aren't the only examples, but I think there's more to it than just like not getting your education. I think the book The Outliers points to this, like a few examples of people who didn't get educations or the right access to resources by their parents, and I don't think that's the full picture. There's an element of not giving up and persevering, while others blame the finger and have excuses. And then there's elements of economy and history at play. If you're born in a communist country, you're doomed to be a factory worker. Or if you're born as a Jew in the Holocaust, I don't care how good your singing was, you're probably going to a concentration camp. So there's all these elements at play, and I think the certain economies like the U.S., I think with the right elements of mindset and perseverance, I think many people have that potential that they don't even realize if they're willing to execute. Number 8, he came up with the Hyperloop, which is a high-speed, reduced-pressure transportation system that allows passengers to travel at an average of 600 miles per hour, which is about 970 kilometers per hour. And this basically will allow us, in theory, to travel to major cities like San Francisco, LA, New York within a few minutes, 15 to 30 minutes, and it will bridge the gap. The technology has been open sourced by Elon and SpaceX, and the first train is projected to be around and running by 2020, which, it's still highly ambitious. I don't know if it will occur. It seems like it's ambitious. And it's just funny because I've talked to people who have joked about how we'll be able to do stuff like this through spaceships or some type of technology within a few years. And now it's actually partially coming true. I mean, there's certain things from sci-fi with virtual reality, like stuff from Star Wars and Star Trek, that have now, we're seeing very clear signs of this being true. I actually did a whole video presenting this whole thing, and it's very interesting. And it's going to be even better because it's not going to be holograms that are blue and white. They're going to be colored holograms. As far as, some of this stuff, it's been around for hundreds of years. There's been all sorts of designs and ideas about people traveling in, tube-like transportation, like in Futurama. But none of it's really been practical. It's just been like crazy stuff. But apparently with this train type thing, it's going to be more practical, and it might actually happen in a way that we didn't expect. Number 9, he admits he would never give up no matter what. So after his 4th rocket launch, he was interviewed, and they asked him if he would have given up after the 4th launch if it failed, and he said, I would not have given up ever unless I was either physically incapacitated to the point where I couldn't move or I died. And I think it's a great lesson because for this type of guy, he just wants to do incredible things, and he's not constrained like most people are by the social pressures of how people will think of you, or just like some people are just emotionally destroyed after a failure for whatever reason, reputation, or just like fear of money. And he doesn't have this. He just like he just he won't give up. It's just fun for him in a certain way. And I think one of the reasons why this is number 10. And the 10th thing is that after he sold his first big venture, which was PayPal, and he sold out of that, he had $250 million. He could have just gone on vacation for the rest of his life to tropical islands. Instead, he ended up plowing every single dollar of that into Tesla and SpaceX, to the point where it was pretty much bankrupt, and everyone was not willing to give him any funding, and it was a failure. And he even had a friend sit him in front of YouTube videos of rocket ships exploding to convince him to give up. And basically he persisted despite all of this because he thought that, you know, all that invested, he just needed a few more years and there would be a breakthrough, which ended up happening. I mean, it was quite the gamble. I don't think everyone should take that because there's a lot more failure stories. But I think the reason why he's able to do this is because he comes from it from a completely different perspective. He never had any, you know, ulterior purpose throughout this whole thing. Like, I want to make this money so I can live on vacation islands or whatever else. And because of that, he's free from like this burden of money, or I'm doing this for money, or if I fail, I won't have money to eat. I mean, he's completely fine with you know, showering at the YMCA. So for him, like, that was never of interest of him, like these tropical vacations or whatever. So it was more about impacting the world, and you know, he saw some merit in that, so he did what he had to do. And so arguably, you know, for most people, I don't think this is the practical approach because, you know, it's really risky. And even Elon, he does talk about how, like, he did this commencement speech, and long story short, he said, you know, when you're younger, you don't have a family and kids to feed, so it's arguably easier, and I recommend if you're younger to take bigger risk, because when you have a family, it's tougher to make big risk when you have to put food on the table. So it's not practical for everyone to take these huge, crazy risks. In fact, I don't recommend or suggest it. However, what you can take from him is this whole mindset shift. And from that, you know, if you look to, okay, how can I have this base level of guaranteed income so I don't have to worry about the things that average people are concerned about, poverty and money and food. After that, you go from a different, you hit a fearless type mentality where it's more about how can I make the biggest impact to help the world. And from that, usually, if you do succeed in a way, the money will naturally come anyways. So it's a very common mindset for a lot of wealthy billionaires. They usually have a bigger purpose in mind, and then they have this mindset of the money will come from that. It's not my major goal. And so nonetheless, they know money is important because without it, they can't feed their children. So those are the 10 things from Elon Musk that I learned. Hopefully they will be of help or just a reminder. And I highly encourage you, if you're a helpful person, to share this video, watch it time and time again to remind yourself, and do your own research on Elon just to inspire yourself. And of course, actually get going. Don't just sit there and do nothing. Thanks for watching. Peace.